Buenas and Hafide. Here at the University of Guam, we've been thinking about the idea of island wisdom as a component of our strategic planning. A component of island wisdom is the idea of island leadership. And so island wisdom and its component leadership are related to the cultures that we have developed in these islands over thousands of years. And island leadership is something that's unique to small island communities the world over. I first got interested in the idea of island leadership growing up in the Virgin Islands, and then also my academic study ever since has been these relatively small island communities of the Caribbean Sea. Since being in Guam for now almost 3 years, I've been appreciating the comparison of the Pacific Islands with my experience in the Caribbean islands and noticing some parallels along the way. The big difference here in the Pacific, of course, is that our island communities have indigenous cultures that are thousands of years old, and so that's a difference from the Caribbean situation. But a lot of other things are quite similar. So what is island leadership? So island leadership refers to the unique demands placed on particularly the well-educated and professional classes in relatively small island communities to take up leadership roles. So take, for example, Guam. A population of 165,000 people, this relatively small city's worth of population, is doing things that larger states and larger even independent countries are having to do in terms of managing an entire government, a governor, a legislature, courts, local and appellate courts, local and federal courts. We have our own power grid, we have our own sewer system, our own water system, we have our own customs and immigration and managing our borders. We have fisheries, we have exclusive economic zone. We have 7 consuls of independent countries accredited to the governor of Guam. So this, in some ways, a mayor of a small city of 165,000 people has 7 diplomats, the equivalents of ambassadors, accredited to her to deal with these international issues. So that's an example of the kinds of things that you're expected to do in this relatively small environment. Another example would be moving on to the kind of people. So all of these different roles inside the society of Guam have to be filled by the people that we have. And so what's very common for, particularly for college educated professional people in Guam and these other islands, is that they're expected to assume leadership roles in ways that people living in smaller communities or other communities around the country and the world are not expected to. So it's typical that you would be expected to serve on boards, on advisory boards or governing boards, that you would perhaps run for office, that you'd accept an appointed position to office, that you'll be expected to take up a business, to be an entrepreneur in a business for something that's needed in the society. And all these things are available to somebody who lives in a town of 165,000 people in Oregon or Virginia or some other place. But in Guam and our other small islands, there is this heightened expectation for leadership in this environment. And our local neighbors also have everything that I've just mentioned for Guam, and then also that they're independent nations. So the Republic of Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands have all of those expectations that people in Guam have, as well as an ambassador in Washington, an ambassador in Tokyo, an ambassador to the United Nations, plus all that you associate with that kind of responsibility. A vote there in the United Nations, dealing with foreign powers, often being squeezed between powers. It's a lot to put on a relatively small population. A further thing that all of these small islands have to maintain is their own healthcare systems, which in the pandemic we've been experiencing the stresses on those. And so I think it's important to think about the kinds of people who assume these roles. So let me just give you a few examples of some people from our region and the kinds of things that they have done in their lives that indicate the need for this kind of island leadership. So first I'd like to point out Antoinette Sanford, Tony Sanford. She was chair of the Board of Regents of the University of Guam, but she's also been chair of the Guam Chamber of Commerce. She's been a senator in the Guam legislature, and she's been a business person of the year by multiple organizations. She started her own tech firm and has been very successful at that. She's a mentor to many, particularly women leaders, but also to many others as well, including me. Another example would be our governor, Lou Leon Guerrero. Of course, a registered nurse. That's fairly unusual for a governor to have been a nurse, and so that's been remarkably helpful during our pandemic to have someone with a healthcare background leading us through it. She's also been a banker, and she's been a chief executive officer of the Bank of Guam, and of course she's been a legislator and now governor of Guam. So another example of a wide variety of interests, an unusual mixture of activities. Next up is my predecessor, Robert Underwood, who was, of course, president of the University of Guam. Before that, a teacher and a professor, administrator in the university. He's also been an activist for indigenous rights and for indigenous culture and indigenous language. He's also been a board and council member in an array of organizations, including even up to now. He's been also a politician and a congressman, a member of Congress for 10 years. Another example is Hilda Heine, the former president of the Republic of the Marshall Islands. She is a poet and an author, so a poet and a president isn't a very common combination, but she's extraordinary that way. She was a teacher. She's one of the first Marshallese women to earn a doctorate. And she's been an administrator in various government roles and also a representative as really in a diplomatic role to international organizations. So again, an unusual combination, expectations for leadership in a wide variety of areas. And lastly, my final example is Larry Rigatol, who is currently an adjunct professor and master navigator, teaching students at the University of Guam to build traditional proas and to navigate and sail them. So he's originally from Yap, and he's also the holder of degrees from the University of San Francisco as well as Oxford University. And he's also been an advocate for indigenous cultures and lifeways in a number of different situations. He's been the chair of the banking board in the Federated States of Micronesia, and also the head of multiple government organizations and executive head of government divisions. And he's been a diplomat and a senior representative in his country's foreign service. So that mixture is also highly unusual, a combination of traditional and sort of more international level kinds of leadership that you wouldn't expect from people living in other relatively similar sized populations, but in other places in the world. And that breadth and depth of leadership gives an added level to the island wisdom that we have in this region and in small island communities the world over. So island leadership is a component of island wisdom and something that we in this area, this region of the world, can bring to the world to help us solve our problems. And as we all are emerging from the pandemic and dealing with the fallout from a number of different challenges of recent years, we know the world needs help. And we in Micronesia can provide, we in small island communities can provide elements of leadership and wisdom to the world. Situ Usmas.